Meeting. We are going to get started. Committee, today we are going to have a hearing on House Bill 2039, requiring students to pass an American Civics test in order to graduate with a high school diploma. We will start off with an explanation of the bill from our reviser. Tamara, are you with us today?
Yes, thank you. Current law requires all accredited high schools to provide a course of instruction on the government, its institutions, and the Constitution of the United States. That course is required for graduation from high school. House Bill 2039 would require, as part of that course of instruction, each high school student to pass a basic civics test or series of tests comprising a total of 60 questions randomly selected from the civics examination administered by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. The bill would also require each accredited high school to submit aggregate student achievement data for that test to the State Board of Education annually. The State Board would compile those reports and submit a summary report to the Legislature in January of each year. The bill would authorize the State Board of Education to adopt rules and regulations to implement the provisions of the bill. House Bill 2039 would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, what questions do you have for our reviser? I am seeing none, so we will go ahead and begin with proponent testimony. With us today is our Attorney General, Derek Schmidt, for in-person testimony. There we go.
On? There we go. There we go. All right. Appreciate the invitation. Glad to be in the building in person, and glad to be at the Education Committee. I don't think I've testified here this year, and perhaps not for some time. So thank you. So you have my written testimony. Let me just kind of lay out why I'm here, and then I'll turn it over to Representative Hubert because it's his bill, and I appreciate his sort of leading the charge on this thing. So here's my interest in. Back in 2015, way back, I thought it was a pretty good idea to add the actual naturalization exam as a component of graduating from high school. And here's why. Some of you, I suspect, maybe all of you have had the privilege of attending a naturalization ceremony. There are a few things, in my view, that are more tear-jerking than being with folks who have worked so hard for so long, by choice, to become U.S. citizens. And I've had the privilege of being at several of them, and I had actually just been at one back at the point I got engaged in this. And of course, one of the requirements to become a U.S. citizen by naturalization is to pass the naturalization exam set by whatever we're calling it now, the Immigration Service. And it just seemed to me sensible, what, if that's a requirement to become a U.S. citizen for those who are choosing citizenship, why wouldn't we at least ask the same of all of us that were privileged to have been born to it? So that was sort of my very basic origin in all of this. So we came up with, did a little research, discovered there was a group back then called the Foss Institute out of Arizona. I'm not quite sure if they still exist or not, but anyway, they'd done a lot of work on this, and we're recommending this sort of approach in states. And we put together a suggestion, actually went over to the state board. I can't remember if, Dina, were you on the board then when I came over? I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember. Anyway, I can't remember if Representative Horst was there. Anyway, I came over to the state board. We had a great discussion. I made my pitch, and they did what they did and created some civics learning pieces, and everybody moved down the road. And I didn't think much more about it. I mean, that's sort of my origin and my alpha and omega on the issue. And then a couple of years ago, I read in the paper that Representative Hubert had proposed legislation to require the same thing that I'd been pitching, back in the day. And so I made, perhaps, in the spirit of no good deed goes unpunished, I called Steve and said, hey, that's an idea that I'd worked on, and I think it's a great idea, more power to you. And of course, his response was essentially, why don't you help? And so I said, I'd be glad to. I still think it's a good idea. So that's how I came to be here. And I've been glad to support his efforts over the last couple of years, and he's gotten it out of the House now, thank you. And I know he's worked a lot with the board. And I know there's other issues on whose authority and turf and require. I got all that. You guys will work through it. My interest is I just really think, we all ought to have to meet the same standard we expect of naturalized citizens in terms of knowledge about how this government works. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel to do it because we've already got an exam in place that does that. That's my simple bottom line philosophy. And it's why I'm here, and I'm glad to support the effort and hope that you all will work it out. And with that, I'd be glad to stand for questions or stand aside and let Steve talk, who's up to his elbows in the particulars.
Committee, are there questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you, Madam Chair. Could you go back into history? You said that you got some things done and they added some courses. What exactly did they do, and what are we asking them to do more now?
So, I will tell you what I believe was the case. It's from memory, and if I misstated, it's not by design, and, the board or Representative Hubert can correct me. But, my pitch originally, when I went to the board way back when, was why don't you just adopt the naturalization exam as a condition of graduation? And the response to that, they created a much broader civics ed effort. One option among many, as opposed to a requirement for everybody, was doing the exam. But there are lots of different ways you could satisfy this broader requirement on civics, and it's my understanding, at least, that that's been, it's sort of optional participation, if you will, and so there's very uneven engagement on that around the state. It's not quite what I had in mind, but it wasn't my decision to make. I made a recommendation, and, they went their direction. That's great. That's what they're elected for, but I don't know. To the extent that this is just another exam or just another civics lesson, I understand why it's, I don't want to say controversial, but why there's a lot of different points of view on where it fits. I guess I view this a little bit differently, because it's not, in my mind, at least just another exam or just another civics lesson. It is what the government of the United States says you must be able to pass in order to become a naturalized citizen of the United States. And why don't we apply that standard to ourselves? So that's yeah. Is that a fair description of, how things went? Because I think that's accurate. But it's called civics. And they were great. Who was the guy? It was Linda's husband. He used to be the civics guy at Department of Ed. He's retired now. Yeah, Don. Thank you, Don. Yeah, Don was great. And, for a couple of years after the board or the department, whoever it was, created the Civics Advocacy Network, they'd have meetings of civics instructors, and he invited me to come over. I'd visit with them, and, we'd all get excited about civics. It was a good thing. That sort of trickled away, at least my involvement has. Maybe because Don's retired, I don't know. But I'm not critical of what they've done. I think what they've done is very good. It just isn't exactly what I recommended. Steve liked what I recommended, so I said, sure, I'll be glad to say I still think it's a good idea, because I do. Thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Attorney General, for being here. Now, I know you have you spend a lot of time in your job supporting the U.S. Constitution and the Kansas Constitution. And so don't you have, that being said, don't you have respect for the powers of the State Board of Education?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Although, I'm quick to say, I remember early in my service, we had a couple of board members who, were dear friends, and they wanted me to opine on exactly where the line is between your legislative power and their, whatever this constitutes, a general administrative power. I can't remember what the phrase is without looking it up. And I was like, I can opine on it, but we've got 150 years of state history without getting a clear answer. It's not always exactly clear where that boundary is. But yes, absolutely I do, which is why I went to them first.
Yeah, and so we already have requirements to pass, a government class as part of a high school curriculum. We already have these in place. And now this would be a mandate saying that every student would have to pass a civics test, even though they already have credits they have to achieve, they have to pass, and they have to achieve. It just seems to be another opportunity for us to dictate where we are not in that position to be doing that we have a state board that's looking at, and we have Kansas CAN guidelines for what we are for our students to achieve. So, I just see this as often being, this is just another matter of overreach. I'm sorry.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Mr. Attorney General. Along those veins, Whose responsibility is it to allocate funding?
Right. As you know, Article 6 says that would be the legislature's
Thank you.
responsibility and a duty. Yeah.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Mr. Attorney General.
That leader.
Absolutely. We want, our kids more engaged with civics. This year, my son, online education, was doing his U.S. government, and we were able to have discussions after that because I was home. But is there another way, maybe instead of just a test, maybe actually working with Department of Education, making legislators, that we are active in those schools, and something that maybe instead of a test that they're probably going to forget about that in a couple of weeks, but maybe something with an experience with legislators participating in schools and trying to get the same, outcome, but maybe a different approach that might be more meaningful with students.
Sure. Senator, absolutely. That's, that's what you guys get paid the big bucks for, is to decide what the path forward is. This is one idea. It's one I do like, and I don't think it has to be an either or, but that's ultimately your decision, not mine. I really like the idea, as I think you're suggesting, of more legislative engagement with students. And I will, if I might, Madam Chair, briefly just share an anecdote on that, maybe it'll plant a seed or maybe not. Maybe you already do it and I just don't know it. But back in the day, when I served as the Republican floor leader and Senator Hensley served in the role you're now in, NCSL used to have something they called America's Legislators Back to School program. And, they always encourage legislators to get in the classroom early in the semester and talk to kids. And it's one thing to have words on a page. It's quite another to try to make that live. And one of the things that Anthony and I agreed on, and we drove it out of the majority leader's office, every single year we engaged all our members, all 40, Republican and Democrat, and we would actively say, Senator, can we help set up school meetings for you with kids in your district? We will do the logistics. We will call and seek an invitation. If the door's open, we will set up the logistics. We will schedule it and get you there. All you got to do is talk with kids. And it was really very well received. We had, I don't remember the numbers, but probably at least 2/3 of our members were willing to do that routinely. And after about the second or third year of doing that, the schools tended to be more open to it. At first, they're like, what are you doing? You got a political person call, all that kind of stuff. But after they realized this wasn't politic and it was just good. So I think that'd be fantastic if it's not already happening, to maybe formalize that a bit more.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Attorney General. While we currently require a civics or government class to be taught, we don't have any requirements for what curriculum is used, correct?
I'll defer to others on that. I suspect that there are requirements that I don't set, and perhaps you don't set, but others do. I'll defer to others who know more. This is not required, if that's the question. This is not required.
Right. In other words, there's no set textbook or publication that is required to be used. It's just that a government or civics class be required for graduation, I believe.
You're now beyond my knowledge, and
Okay.
I defer to the folks that know that, and there's some in this room that.
I don't have any opposition to requiring a passing of a test. I think that's a better option than requiring a certain curriculum because our schools pick and choose so differently what they actually teach. So setting a set test for all allows them to teach to that exam how they choose. So I would support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, and I hope you won't be offended if I slip away. It's not for lack of interest. So
Exit
thanks for
stage
hearing
right.
this.
Thank you. Next up for proponents, we have Representative Steve Hubert, District 90, from the Kansas House of Representatives. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm very passionate about this. My former vice chair can tell you in my work in the past, I had a great civics teacher in high school. Somebody who motivated me, somebody who encouraged me, somebody who got me hooked up with Boys State. I got elected to be a state rep at Boys State in 1976. So when I ran for election in 2000, I told people I was running for re-election. But, I want the passion that civics teacher instilled into me to be what we're instilling in our kids today. And I see so much potential for us to do better. I've done what you've talked about. I've met with groups, I've talked with kids, and I see a lot of apathy not so much with kids, but even as kids become adults. And I'm saying, man, we need to do better. You know, there's data out there. There's a lot of groups on this issue that look at this. 21 states have already done it. My balloon language is a very strong compromise that I'll talk about later. But, you know, I've seen anywhere from 1 in 3 to, you know, different numbers that our kids can't even name the 3 branches of government. Can't name basic facts about the Bill of Rights and what are the freedoms in our Bill of Rights. As you look at our society today, it's obvious. We need to do better. We need people to know what is in our Constitution. You know, Benjamin Franklin, he was asked, what form of government did you give us? And he said, you know, it's a constitutional republic if you can keep it. You know, a lot of people say, well, we live in a democracy. And we do. But it's framed by our founders who were very wise in regards to how they set up the checks and balances and the things that our kids need to know. Even in regards to, you know, man, I don't want to go into national politics, but, you know, there's a lot of debate even what happened in the last 3 months. And, you know, if you look at the, you know, the remedies that were put into our Constitution, you know, legal challenges that could be made, you know, they were being followed. And in a democracy, how that plays out with all the checks and balances is where we're at today. And I fully support that. And I want our kids to be engaged. So I look at the basic facts that are in the citizenship test. I call them mathematical multiplication table facts. They're basics that you learn in order to take the next step in being engaged. Because you can't be good at trig or analytic geometry or calculus if you don't know your multiplication tables. You need to know the basics. And that's what this test provides for. You know, this is a book, and I was talking with Senator Straub, but she has a similar one that a friend gave to me from 1922, 8th grade, State of Kansas published curriculum on civics. Man, some good information in here. I'd struggle, you know, to really, you know, I'd have to do a little reading and review to be able to go into the curriculum that was taught almost 100 years ago. We need to do better. And this is a small step because, you know, in my compromise, I'm saying we already have the requirement in statute. So I'm not stepping on toes. It's already out there. Some people said that, well, my test requirement was high stakes and could cause children maybe not to graduate, or there was cost involved. You know, I think $400 and some thousand. And so instead of pushing, like I did several years ago, to fight for what 21 other states has done, is just to pass it. I did try to reach out to the state board and to Randy Watson. I went over 2 years ago, and I went over this year. And I spoke to him about my desire to find common ground. But by the amendment language, as you read it, I'm rolling it in. And what I did was work with my civics teacher in my local school district, Valley Center, and I thought he had provided written testimony because he explained what he was doing and how that compared to what I wanted to do. And I said, hey, I want to basically take what you're doing in the classroom already, update the statute. By updating the statute, we get buy-in, we get publicity, we get people, civics teachers, with a new, renewed emphasis on how do we engage our students, how do we teach them the basics, which is what the Attorney General was talking about, and then how do we take that to the next level, which is what we all want, civics engagement, critical thinking skills based on factual information. You know, so many people, even over this last year, you know, they say, well, we need to get rid of the Electoral College. And I understand that that's a hot button issue in politics right now. Not too many people can really, you know, with clarity say it's in our Constitution. And if you want to get rid of it, there is a way to do it, but it's not just based on public opinion. So, you know, those are the sort of things when our kids, when the public are engaging on issues, they need to be informed on and they need to know them. And I want the passion that I have, the passion that the Attorney General has, to be your passion. The Kansas City Star contacted me, And we had a great discussion, and there was an editorial that was written that shocked me. I don't know about you, but I've never gotten a lot of public, positive feedback from the Kansas City Star, and it was great. And I was like, but he said I was a lone wolf. I'm not a lone wolf. I joked that, the Attorney General and I maybe were a wolf pack. And so even in my committee, I joked with my members. I tried to have some fun. I said, join my wolf pack. Let's make this something in the state of Kansas that we get excited about. We get our kids excited about it, and we do this. It's not intrusive because it's rolled into the class. It allows the teacher to be in charge of how it's done, how it's weighted. It's not a make or break test. I kicked this out on my committee. I went to the floor. I passed on the floor on a voice vote. And before I had a chance for final action, there were some people that tried to kill my bill. I'm sure you're all shocked. It's never happened to you. I know. It just never has happened. But they were trying to say that maybe I was singling out and going to cause challenges to special education children. The way that my balloon is written doesn't change anything in regards to even how the class is taught now. I did put a piece in there for IEPs. I didn't have to spell out all the other different, learning language, 504s, all the different things. You just don't because it's already in place. But some people challenged and said that was going to happen. So I had to very quickly, on the fly, check with my revisor, get back with people and say, no, that's let's just say it was not a good argument. So we passed it on the floor. Here we are today. I still believe that if there's tweaks that need to be made, I've offered with, Randy and the state board to engage with me. I'm frustrated that, I didn't get more of an opportunity to do that in the last month, but I still believe even by coming to you guys today and for you to work with me, we can still, if there's tweaks that can be made to take care of little details, I'm good with that. And so if you work this bill and you do that, I'd be glad to at least hopefully be in the loop as we do that. And then, you kick something out, we have something, that's the good old fashioned, what I call schoolhouse rocks version of how legislation passes. We go to a conference and we work it out and we get it passed. We update the statute and then we see all the good things that good civics teachers are going to do to help us to do better, to get our kids to learn the basics so that they can be engaged students, become engaged citizens, which is what we all want. I think you're all, I can just tell, you're ready to join the wolf pack. No matter what happens today, no matter what happens with this bill, we're going to move forward. And I know the Attorney General, he's running for governor. I appreciate, he's a good guy, and I told him I want to talk to him more about that. Because that's civics and that's engagement. For him, even on this issue, we lift it up, not because of politics, because we're passionate about doing better. And I appreciate it in the government, that's what I'm looking for. I could talk for a real long time, and I'm going to just stop there and answer questions and ask you to work with me. We don't need to worry about turf. Again, we're updating a statute that's already in place, so we're not breaking new territory. We're not setting precedent. We're simply putting a renewed emphasis on this that needs to happen.
Thank you very much, Representative. We will ask questions. I do want to remind the committee we have 5 opponent testimonies we want to make sure that we can get to and have time to ask questions as well.
Yeah, that's not necessary, no.
So we're going to start with, first hand up was Senator Gossage, and then we'll have Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Representative. And just a really short question. Have you, I see Dina sitting here, have you approached the school board with this idea, and how did that go?
Yeah, I went over there, we talked about it, and again, even before this year, the previous 2 years, my former vice chair can tell you the efforts I put in trying to find that common ground. And so that's why even this year, after those discussions, I really decided to compromise in a way that I felt was a win-win for everybody. Some people told me I went too far with my compromise. I don't believe so, because my ultimate goal is for us to do better. And I still believe that, the Civic Advocacy Network that, the Attorney General was talking about, because I asked Randy if that was pretty much their response, and he said yes. It's a great program, and I said, I have some whereases And I said, I'll put it in so that it gets a little more emphasis, and we start doing it. And they said, no, don't get ahead of yourself. But the reality is they have been working on this issue, but we need to do better. And in 6 years, I can look back and say, yeah, after 6 years, it's time to take this next step because what we've done has not gotten us to where we need to be. I will tell you that they did update their standards, and this test, this requirement is in their standards. So I'm not stepping on toes. I'm simply taking something that's already in the standards, putting a renewed focus on it in a way that we all should agree upon that it needs to be done, and then saying, let's look at your advocacy network in a way, let's get it to the next level because it's voluntary right now. A lot of school boards don't embrace it. My own school board, I asked him, and he said, no, we never have. But he said, I heard that there might be some grant money, and maybe I'll jump on that. And I was like, well, you should be jumping on it even if there's not grant money. But if that's what it takes, we'll get you grant money. So.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that this is already mandated or already in statute. What's the statute number?
Boy, I would defer to your advisor on the statute number.
Thank you.
In my paperwork, I had that, but not in just my testimony. So, but we can get that to you.
Senator Sykes, did you?
I have that statute. It's 723217.
Thank you.
That's at the top of the bill. Okay, Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question, and thanks, Representative, for being here, about the bill. Your last whereas, where it says a free and publicly available civics practice test consisting of 20 multiple choice questions, and then in the bill, it refers to 60.
Okay. And the reason I did that, and that leads to a good point that I didn't speak to, there used to be a biennial civics, history, social studies test every 2 years. There was one in 14 that got thrown out because technically 16 and 18 it was taken, and 20 it wasn't because of the pandemic. But earlier this year, they decided to drop that test. And so they replaced it with a task-based, subjective type of engagement type of assessment on our kids meeting what we want them to learn. And I said, that's good, but we still need some objective data. We still need, and so that was a 60-question test. And so in order to mirror that we were getting 60 questions before, I said, you can take the test 3 times. It's free. Again, teachers can do practice tests as many times as necessary. They can, they can use what is necessary to get to a 60 base, that can be a part of a final of what they roll up in their data that they roll up to the state. But that's why I decided on 60, because there already was a 60 base question assessment that had been dropped.
Follow up.
Yes, so okay, but is there a conflict then between that 20 in the beginning and the 60 on the, I'm trying to figure that out.
Again,
practice
the assessment that the Attorney General was talking about that someone has to pass to become a citizen is 20 questions. And that's even when you take the test online, anybody, I think in my language initially, I have the link that you can do it right now, where you can pull it up, do it, and there's 20 questions. And then it's randomized. Every time you pull it up, you're going to get a different set of 20 questions from 128 that's a part of their pool. So, that's just one 20 set assessment. But in order to get to 60 questions, you take it 3 times, which is the data that we used to get from the state biennial test.
Thank you.
Committee, not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much for being with us today.
I appreciate it. And again, if we get a chance to go to conference and work out any details, I look forward to that. I look forward to, no matter what happens, for this being at least some type of a springboard for us doing better with our civics. Even my opponents will tell you I'm well-intentioned and I understand the concerns they have, but I believe that they've been addressed in a way that can allow us to move forward. And I appreciate working with my esteemed colleagues here in the Senate in doing that, because it's a win-win issue. It truly is. Join my wolf pack. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, I draw your attention. We do have written-only testimony from Carl Moffin, attorney and naturalized citizen. We have with,
And just real quick on Carl Mon, he's a constituent who is from South Africa. And he walked me through even for his experience of taking this test. And he was one of those people who said, Steve, that's baby steps. I asked him to, he spoke in person over there. He couldn't do it today. And even my civics teacher with his written, he couldn't join you today too. But they were powerful testimony that I wish you could have heard in person. Sorry for interrupting. And again, maybe my passion needs to just step out the door and let you finish your testimony.
thank you very much. First up, as far as in-person opponent testimony, we have Blanche Wolfcutter. So she's not necessarily with the Wolf Pack, but she's here today to speak for us.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm very pleased to be here. I spent the first part of my day at Jefferson West High School. I'm a 20-year veteran of teaching both at the middle school and the high school level. Here in the state of Kansas, I've been awarded a Civics Teacher of the Year award, a History Teacher of the Year award, and the Social Studies Teacher of the Year award. I also serve, I'm a very active member on the Kansas Council for History Education, and I am currently serving with the Kansas Department of Education on their history, government, social studies, higher education standards revision team that's working right now. So I come to you equally as impassioned to tell you I do oppose House Bill 2039. Thank you for hearing my testimony. I adore civic engagement. I do a great deal in my own hometown. My current favorite one that I'm working on is we're trying to build a library to make Meriden more walkable, a walkable community. And one of the things that I really admire about a Kansas education is our commitment to civic education. It's really one of our finest qualities. In my classroom, I call it a sanctuary of learning. In room 131, we start each school year out with this quote from President George W. Bush from his first inaugural address. America has never been united by blood or birth or soil. We are bound by ideals that move us beyond our backgrounds, lift us above our interests, and teach us what it means to be citizens. Every child must be taught these principles. Every citizen must uphold them. And every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less American. Oh, I do love that quote. But what it's not simple. Civics is a subjective piece. And if you were in my classroom in room 131, I would say to each one of you that you've been given talents, resources, you've been given skills and passions to make your life and your community's life better. And that cannot be measured by an objective, standardized on a national level test. It is, in my written testimony that I think you have a copy of, it is so beautifully displayed in the Kansas Can civic engagement piece, right? It's this flourishing tree that we, from K through 12 education, really grow. And we're doing a terrific job at that in classrooms across Kansas. It's difficult, it's personal. And with our civic advocacy network, with our college and career readiness standards that you've put in, and with our, let me make certain I get all three of these. I had three I wanted to mention that we're doing really well. Oh, the project-based assessment that we're doing, which follows really great rubric on historical thinking skills, as well as actual utilization of civic skills. I'm wearing my Kansas City Chiefs face mask for a reason. Because when you've set out a game plan, you need to stay that course. And we're doing that really well. And I really encourage you to not put an objective test required for a diploma. To pass it, required for a diploma. It makes for a great lesson plan. I so thoroughly enjoyed discussing with my own students. What do you guys think? Would you be more engaged in my classroom? We talk about big ideas. We do decision makers. We act as if we are President of the United States. We just got done with if you were part of a prohibition advocacy group, how would you campaign? Engagement within the classroom, kinds of activities. So I asked him, if you had this high stakes test, would you pay more attention to these big ideas and principles, knowing that you couldn't get a diploma if you didn't? They are so delightful and so honest. And they were very honest about being more engaged in those kinds of Socratic seminars. How do we reenact civic engagement activities? No, Mrs. Wolfcutter, I don't think we would. I don't think we would. So I want to just close out with this kind of idea. We already have standards for a diploma where you have to pass a full year of American history, where you have to pass at least a semester of government. Tucking this test as a graduation requirement within a government class does not minimize its high-stakes nature. We've already got great standards. We've got activity in that civic advocacy network. You're working through the college and career readiness, and we're judging all of those things, and we are still doing standardized testing just on a project-based way. One of my favorite quotes, I pulled stuff out of my classroom, so it has some tape on it, would come from the American jurist Leonard Hand. And he wrote this in the spirit of liberty back in 1941. I wonder whether we do not rest our hopes too much upon constitutions, upon laws and courts. These are false hopes. Believe me, these are false hopes. Liberty lies in the hearts of men. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it. While it lies there, it needs no constitution, no law, no court to save it. Senators of the Education Committee, can I just tell you, the Kansas Can action that they're taking is really vested in rooting constitutional principles and critical thinking skills, political action, civic engagement in its curriculum right now. We do a disservice by hampering our Kansas graduates with an objective, I want a data point to say, I know that you've been exposed to this kind of test. One of the things that you're currently doing is, that we're currently doing here in Kansas, is we call our graduates, it's called a post-secondary survey, and we ask how they're doing in real life. That's a far better data collector than this high-stakes test. I ask that you let this really good lesson plan stay just that, a lesson plan and not a requirement for a diploma. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. Committee, we've got four more speakers, and we've only got 15 minutes. So next up, we have Thomas Fulbright from the Topeka Public Schools. Thomas.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Erickson, Ranking Member Sykes, and members of the Education Committee. My name is Thomas Fulbright. I teach here at Hope Street Academy in Topeka. I am testifying in support of civics education, but not this bill. As a teacher, I'm here to tell you that this bill's title does not reflect what I think it would actually do. Therefore, I'm going to suggest to you a number of alternative titles maybe this bill could go by to help those who are actually instructed by this bill. That's teachers, social studies teachers in Kansas. I'm doing this kind of inspired, honestly, by some of my work in the classroom. My students read a lot of primary documents, and something that we see in the past is legislators will jokingly sometimes suggest other names for legislation as a way to engage in the debate. For example, Illinois Republican Senator James R. Mann, in a speech over political campaign reform, he said, "I do not believe it ought to be the policy of the government of the United States to provide that nobody but a rich man can run for office. This properly labeled would be labeled a bill to prevent a poor man from holding office in the United States." My students really like this approach to debate. I think it's entertaining. So if you would humor me, I'm going to read you a couple of the suggestions and explain the logic behind it. Number one, an act to lower the bar for our state social studies teachers and students. I'll be honest, awesome things are happening in social studies classrooms around Kansas. Phenomenal things. If any of you had the opportunity to attend the Civic Advocacy Conference, which Attorney General had spoke at, you'd see that students and their teachers are doing wonderful things that are much more than just regurgitating answers on a test. They're taking action in their schools, in their communities, in their state, trying to make change. This is something far greater, far more purposeful than just taking a test. Second suggestion, an act to have students memorize the nuts and bolts of the machinery of our government, but not develop an understanding of the machine, nor prepare them for the responsible operation and maintenance of said machinery. That one got a little wordy. If we want to go with an act to emphasize civic factoids over democratic understanding, I think that would be fine. The idea here is multiple choice tests are not going to prepare students for citizenship. I can't see an argument against that. If we are spending our time in the classroom drilling and killing information so our students can pass this test, because we know their graduation will ride on it, we're not going to spend time in the classroom doing things that are meaningful. That's just me as an honest teacher. Because we care about the kids' future, we want them to have that diploma. We're not going to let something stand in the way. I think that's kind of why we're here presenting. Just the idea that this multiple choice test will stop good things from happening. Third suggestion, an act to establish in Kansas chemistry classes where students memorize the periodic tables but do not conduct the experiments that promote the scientific curiosity, which will foster the next generation of scientists. I think you can go back to your experiences in science class. What made you interested in what you were doing in the classroom? Was it hammering the facts on that periodic table? I kind of doubt it. Just in the same way that we want science classes to inspire the next generation of scientists who will solve our scientific problems, we want to inspire the next generation of citizens. And I don't believe a multiple choice test is going to do anything to inspire anybody. Seem fair? If we are going to address the problems that our society is facing today and address the problems that I'm sure we will face sometime in the future, we need our students to know more than just the facts. And when I say that, they're going to know the facts, but if we end it at the facts for the multiple choice test, I think we'll come up far short of what they're capable of doing. Another suggestion, an act to ignore the wisdom of John Dewey, the author of Democracy in Education. I think social studies teachers can agree that's a fairly important one for us. He wrote in his book, "We're all instructors to realize that the quality of mental process, not the production of correct answers, is the measure of educative growth. A revolution in teaching would be worked." What's the purpose of education? What's the purpose of civic education? Will a multiple choice test meet that purpose? I don't think it will. My fifth suggestion, act to fix a problem with students' knowledge of the United States government that is neither real nor new. I thought it was kind of funny that he mentioned the 1922 legislation. We've been giving tests in America over civic knowledge, American history, to American students since 1917. Any guess how well those tests have gone? Not super great. Over and over, American students prove that they can't perform on a test and recite these facts. Have those generations failed us? Do we think the generations that took those past tests proved that they were incapable just because they didn't pass that test? And 33 out of 100 probably won't prepare somebody to fight the Nazis, right? But they did. Generation after generation, maybe your guys' generation, certainly my generation, did not perform well on these tests. The only thing that we can learn from those tests is those don't tell us anything about a student's preparedness or skills to participate in our civil society. If you want to find out more about that, I would suggest you read Dr. Weinberg's article called Crazy for History in the Journal of American History. I'd recite the whole thing to you, but it's a little long. Sixth suggestion, an act to ignore the advice of leading researchers and organizations in the field of social studies education and focus learning objectives not on developing skills such as critical thinking, but on memorizing information they can find on Google. Again, I'm going to suggest you read more about this in Samuel Weinberg's Why Learn History When It's Already on Your Phone. We have far more important things to do in our classrooms than just teach students facts that they can find out as quickly as I can finish this sentence. If we end at that, we're not spending our time developing the skills that are more important. Critical thinking, the ability to determine whether or not what they just read on their phone is or is not accurate. We need to focus on giving these students skills, not basic knowledge. Number 7, an act to allow presidents at 1600 Pennsylvania to write tests for pupils at 1900 Hope Street. That's where I teach.
Quick question. How many more of these do you have that you're going to share with us? Because, you know, quite frankly, we have...
I understand. You can cut me off as soon as you would like. That's okay. I realized that this list got a little long because I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of passionate about this.
You can tell. I just know that we have three
Yes,
others
and I want you to hear them as
waiting
well.
to speak, and we're to be on the floor
Yes.
in 10 minutes.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you today. Are there any questions?
We'll ask those questions if we can get through our three other speakers. Thank you so much. I see that we have Nathan McAllister, history teacher, Seaman High School, on virtual. And so, Nathan, we are ready for your testimony.
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Very good. Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman. You have my written testimony, and I would just like to provide a few highlights from that testimony, just to point out a few things. And I would like to reiterate that I am opposed to 2039, partially because I feel that it's redundant. I know the time is critical, so I'll get through these fairly quickly. I know the Attorney General mentioned the Civic Advocacy Network. That is something that is ongoing. It was postponed because of the pandemic, but it will come back with new vigor as soon as we are back in what we would consider a normal school year. In addition to that, we also have what is known as the Civic Engagement Conference, which I think is critically important. This is a conference that brings students together from around this state to network with one another, exchange ideas, and learn from one another on all things civics. And it is an amazing conference if you've never been to it. And I would suggest that the Attorney General, who has spoken at that conference, that might be a place where legislators could get involved if they're looking to do that. Another piece that's redundant about this bill is the fact that there is, and it's already been mentioned, that there is a required government class. And putting a make or break test into the government class seems kind of silly and redundant. And I know Representative Hubert mentioned Boise State, which is also encouraged at every high school in the state of Kansas. And my next point is this. Everybody has spoken about engagement and wanting students to be engaged in their learning. This bill does not get us there. A multiple choice test is not engagement. Engagement is students doing. Some of you may know that I've had several students write several pieces of legislation, 3 of which have passed. Those students understand the legislative process, understand the inner workings of government better than any test I could have given. And that is civic engagement. Civic engagement is writing legislation. Civic engagement is students speaking at their city council. Civic engagement is students voicing their concerns at their school board meeting. Civic engagement is having my students work the polls during the election and understanding how that system works and getting engaged in their community. This bill does not get us to where we need to be. This bill does not engage students. All it is us jumping through one more hoop, one more hurdle, and doesn't get us where we need to be. I would actually propose an amendment that we go back to the original 400,000 and put that into the civic engagement conference and expand that and have regional conferences throughout the state. And with that, I am done, and hopefully we can get back or get you to the floor.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we have Mark Giuseppe, Legislative and Political Advocacy for KNEA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you all can hear me.
We can.
Delighted to be here. Let me just say we've all had our head-slapping moments when Jimmy Kimmel walks around the Hollywood Boulevard and asks people questions for basically the test. I suggest you do. I took it. I had to know who the current vice president was, but you know, American, I had to identify the ocean on the west coast of the United States, and I had to know where the Statue of Liberty was. This is not a test of civic engagement. It is a test that is essentially some American trivia questions. To teach to this test would be a disservice to our students, and I think you heard 3 outstanding social science teachers tell you that. We are alarmed by what we see, but it's not our high school kids that are alarming us. It's not our high school kids that invaded the United States Capitol and called for the hanging of Vice President Pence. It's not our high school kids that are trying to sue states and say that states can't manage their own election. Something, by the way, is left in the Constitution that states manage their own elections. We need to remember that civics is far more than reciting some facts and knowing the things that are on the citizenship test. There's nothing wrong with the citizenship test, but it won't necessarily make you engage in civics, engage in your community. I would also just remind you that we do have Article 6 of the Kansas Constitution that leaves the supervision of our system of education to the elected State Board of Ed, and that it is their responsibility to manage curriculum and assessment for our schools. And again, you've heard these eloquent teachers talk about the standards, and Kansas can, and so on. We suggest the legislature is perfectly within their rights to make suggestions. Representative Hubert has done that to the board directly, to pass resolutions calling on the board to consider certain actions, but the decision rests with the State Board of Education and the groups that they bring together to write standards and advise them on curriculum and assessment. This bill is entirely unnecessary, and we would ask this committee not to pass it. And Madam Chair, if you ever get time to ask questions, I'd be happy to stand for them.
Very much, Mr. Giuseppe. Next up, we have Leah Flitter, Director of Government Relations, Kansas Association of School Boards. Leah, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And I wanted to note at the beginning here that the United School Administrators of Kansas join us on this testimony. It would be hard for me to improve upon the the testimony of the impassioned and knowledgeable teachers that we've just heard from. And I will just say that we a lot of the information in our testimony has probably already been covered. So I would just close with that we believe that this bill, while well-intentioned, is duplicative and conflicts with the state board's jurisdiction over Kansas public schools. KASB and USA Kansas stand ready to work with the state board and the legislature to make the goal of increased civic engagement a reality. Thank you, and I will leave you a couple of minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. Committee, I want to direct your attention. We do have opponent written testimony from Dina Horst and Ben Jones, legislative liaisons of the Kansas State Board of Education, as well as from Jill Weber, president-elect of the Kansas Council for Social Studies. We have neutral written testimony from Matthew Klusner, the civics teacher that Representative Hubert mentioned from Valley Center High School. Committee, I see that we're over time, but we still have, I think, 3 minutes that we can have questions before we are supposed to be on the Senate floor. So are there questions for those that have testified as opponents? I am seeing, oh, okay, Senator O'Shea.
Thank you. I didn't know if I'd get a chance to ask, but I was looking some at the Civic Engagement, Civic Advocacy Network, some of the materials and content on there. And then I was looking at the test, and while I share some of the opponent's concerns, from a glance at this content, I wonder if less of it is about the test and more about the content within civic engagement, because it did not appear to me that these resources matched up very closely with the tests that we make people take when they become American citizens. So maybe it's part comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would simply say, Blanche or Thomas, did you want to address that? I need you to come to the podium and introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself.
Thomas Fulbright. Senator O'Shea, so what you're trying to say is that the exam, the citizenship exam, the content lines up with what you think our civic advocacy goals are? It doesn't appear to. And are you just, I don't know if you're saying if you're presenting that as a good thing or a bad thing. This is my point of us lowering the bar. If we know that those facts are all that we're trying to do, it's going to prevent us from doing all of the other great things. We're not going to ignore any facts. We're just not going to stop there. If I know that my students have to pass a test based on this set of questions, that's what I'm going to focus on. Does that help? Okay.
I need you to come to the podium and introduce yourself, please.
Blanche Wolfcutter from Jefferson West High School. And I think that if you took a look at the government standards, particularly more focused, because the citizenship test is more based on knowing how the government works. So if you were to look at our statewide government standards, I think you'd find more partnership in there rather than this broader idea that we're after and we're targeting, which is civic engagement. It's so much bigger.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank everyone that participated today in our hearing, and the hearing for House Bill 2039 is now closed and our committee meeting is adjourned.